Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Little Lunch Lecture. For those of you who don't know me just yet, because we've only done this 22 times since March or April, thank you. I'm Stephanie Barrett, the Director of Donor Relations at the Coastal Land Trust. As we just mentioned, we are recording the lecture today, and we are on Facebook Live, just FYI, I wanted to let you know. There will be a few links in the chat out to our email sign up and some other things if you want to check those out. Feel free to click those links but yeah, let's see. Oh, last thing is we'll keep everybody on mute during the talk today, but at the end we'll have time for questions and answers if you guys want to unmute at that time and ask your question, or if you want to type it into the chat or on Facebook Live comments. We will we'll ask all of those questions and get those answered if we possibly can. We are honored today to bring back Bland and Ann Simpson as our presenters. As longtime friends and champions of the Coastal Land Trust, Ann and Bland hardly need any introduction, but you may recall if you were with us in May, they joined the Little Lunch Lectures and presented Little Rivers and Waterway Tales, and today they will introduce us to the Inner Islands of North Carolina. Ann and Bland, thank you so much for being with us today. We are excited to see more beautiful photos and hear more stories about Eastern North Carolina.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll jump right in. Thanks.
Well, first you might want to say what an inner island is. Stephanie had that question, so we had a conversation, okay. But that would be a good start.
We'll start with question and answer. What is an inner island? It is not an outer bank. There's plenty of literature about the outer banks, folks, as you all know, but we discovered in working on an earlier book, Into the Sound Country, that there was very little literature about many of these inside islands in the rivers and sounds, and so that's what we endeavored to cover here. This was supposed to be a chapter Into the Sound Country, but it got too big, and we took it out and made its own book. So I'm going to jump right in from the prelude of this book. We're looking at Harbor Island here. That's the core banks are way beyond out there. This is at the north end of Core Sound. A few more miles to the left of this picture, you're in Pamlico Sound.
Yep, right off of the towns of Atlantic and sea level, a little bit east of Beaufort.
Scores and scores of inner islands lie scattered about the many waters of North Carolina's river and sound country. Yet less than a century hence, our grandchildren's grandchildren will wonder over what and where these islands were. So many of them will have gone under and disappeared in that single hairbreadth of time. The land subsides and sinks, and the seas rise. Were it not for the slender barriers, the Outer Banks, Core Banks, and Bogue, scarcely holding back the rising ocean as they are, many of these inner islands would not be extant today. I have boated to them, beached small craft upon them, worn my trousers rolled, and walked their small shores, listened always for notes from ancient flutes and shell shakers, snatches of song in the wind, and knowing I was there but for a slip of time, probably never to return, to most of them, I loved them all. Many must have felt such a fondness for these little bits of land, for just regard the traces, the names left behind on them, names to honor travail, the hard-working lumps, and those who did it, Sam Windsor's lump, a name to ward off pain, No Ache Island, and names to make an often harsh landscape more tender or personable somehow, the Bunch of Hair, the Maiden Paps, names for women we loved, Catherine Jane, Cora June, names half an alphabet and more of all manner of beasts, fish, and fowl, Bird Island, Brant Island, Buck Island, Cat Island, clam, cow, dog, duck, so many goats, goose, gull, herring shoal, so many hog islands, horse, louse, raccoon, sheep, sow, steer, swan, teal, even penguin and little penguin, names of growing things, Bean Island, Carrot Island, cedar, cotton, flax, myrtle, pilantary, pine, rice, and wood, and names of former inhabitants and all but forgotten honorees, Campbell, Huggins, Phillips, Piver, Rumley, Indian. All these and more have I loved.
And a lot of these islands are small shell islands in the middle of the sound, like this one. But throughout the coastal plain, you also find in the rivers and on the edges of some of the sounds, these beautiful cypress trees. This, I'm sure a lot of you have seen scenes like this throughout the coastal plain, everywhere from Brunswick up to Swan Quarter. There are beautiful cypress trees everywhere along our coast. These are on Michele Island in Elizabeth City. We put Michele Island in the book partly because Bland and his father used to go to a marina on Michele Island and get a boat and go out boating through the Pasquotank. Want to say anything more about that?
You could rent a boat for $1 a day back then.
A little bit, Albemarle Sound, the lower middle river. It's one of the mouths of the Roanoke. Looking out Albemarle Sound over towards Kitty Hawk.
Hey, Ann and Bland, we're having a little bit of feedback, so I'm going to ask you to pause for just 1 second. Not quite sure what's happening, but let's try to take a pause and jump back in and see if the sound is a little bit better. Try now.
Okay, looking at the Albemarle Sound over towards Kitty Hawk. Yep, all right, 60 miles straight across.
It's a long swim.
That's a long swim. All right, so now we're going to move on up the sound to Currituck. Did that change all right? Okay, good. So go ahead. Oh, keep going. Currituck, this is Knott's Island. This is the Knapp School, named for Joseph Knapp, who is responsible for helping to set up the Mackey's Island National Wildlife Refuge on Knott's Island, and a great coastal booster.
Joe Knapp, he was a publishing tycoon. He invented the parade kind of inserts in newspapers. His big house, which was modeled on Mount Vernon, was just a little bit out of this frame. It doesn't exist anymore. He bought the Mackey's Island, which is adjacent to Knott's Island, separated only by a small creek. He bought Mackey's Island, about 8,000 acres, from Thomas Dixon, the man who wrote The Klansman, which became D.W. Griffith's movie, The Birth of the Nation. And Dixon had bought it from the John Roper Lumber Company, which had a lumber camp out there. So here's a little bit about that's important about Joe Knapp's environmental legacy to us. During his 30 Currituckian years, Knapp also had a goal of nothing less than the replenishment of the North American waterfowl population. In 1929, he brought John Huntington to Mackey Island, where he bred for release 3,000 ducks that spring, a practice Knapp would successfully promote among thousands of farmers. By 1931, Knapp had hired Huntington and started a group called More Game Birds in America, absorbing the earlier American wildfowlers and laying the organizational groundwork for the 1937 founding of Ducks Unlimited. All in all, a visionary clutch of hunters who sought and meant to repopulate the flyways by repairing the drought-stricken Canadian breeding grounds for most of this continent's ducks and geese. So a very important environmental and conservation heritage and legacy that's tied to this particular property.
So if you take a trip out to Mackey's Island, to Knott's Island, you see this site where Joe Knapp's house was. You can also pick apples if it's the right time of year at the Martin's Vineyard. You pick apples and Scuppernong vineyards. We happened to be there at a time of a bumper crop for this. Now we're going to take you a little bit farther down the coast to Manteo.
This is the old Dare County Courthouse downtown, and it's a beautiful rainy day when we were walking around town when Ann took this shot. This courthouse is of particular interest to us. One of my grandfathers practiced law inside it, and the other I was superintendent of the building of the jail that's attached to it out back. I don't think they ever met back then, but two grandfathers working in the same place. While we're in Dare County, I want to mention Virginia Dare and observe how many different things her name has gone on. I'm just going to mention a few of them. Virginia Dare's name was on a wine. It was the name of an extract company, the name of a 1892 novel. It's the name of a side wheel tour boat on Mountain Lake in Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia. It's the name of a bicycle tour, the name of a Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. It's everywhere. A highway, Virginia Dare Trail on the Dare County Outer Banks, and even a prized canine, I learned. The parents were No Time to Lose, the sire, and the dam was named Noel Mama Jama, and the bloodhound herself was named Virginia Dare. And my apostrophe to this, and there are many, many, many more things, coins and stamps and so forth. My apostrophe to this topic. Babe in film, babe on stage, babe on stamp and coin. We wanted you, Virginia Dare, though disappeared into the wild, to be taken in by those whose people had awaited you and your coming in that forest fastness for 1,200 years, to be raised by them, the Algonquians, foundling as one of their own, and to grow up strong, gorgeous, magical, to sail the ocean sea and present yourself proudly before Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, to have a daughter of your own, and whatever else we wished for you, what everyone was after, what those of us on our third cups of coffee in the Little Manio restaurant carrying your name really wanted, above all, was never, ever to let you go. Virginia Dare.
Virginia Dare. Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, so we're moving on now to right off of Ocracoke Island to a little tiny grassy strip called Beacon Island, where there's a beautiful pelican rookery, and where we went in 2002 with John Weskey, shown here, to do a banding project with young pelicans. Not a very sanitary process, I have to say. The poor pelicans eat a lot of fish, and as you tromp around in their rookery doing the banding, there's a lot of fish everywhere.
That's our younger daughter, Carrie, there on the right. On this particular banding event, Anne was kissed on the lower lip by one of the pelicans, and that drew blood. And poor Carrie got a nice scrape there on her right arm, a red badge of courage. If you're looking on Carrie, we felt your pain that day. And
not far from Beacon Island is another island that was once a huge center of commerce, more than Ocracoke itself, called Shell Castle Island. And this is where this picture you see looks like an oyster reef. These are actually ruins, the outlines of commercial buildings and wharves that were once on Shell Castle and have eroded away over time. You're going to read something about that?
We'll read a short paragraph about what was going on here. And these are huge warehouse foundation remains here. This was an oyster rock that was built up with rock and cypress cribbing and dirt brought in, and it was built up to be much bigger than it was in its natural state. An energetic and some might say visionary inlet pilot named John Wallace in the late 1780s threw in with the fate of wealthy Washington, North Carolina shipper and mercantilist John Gray Blunt. With Blunt's social and political support and his periodic investments, Captain John became Governor Wallace, chief executive of Shell Castle Island, and for the next 20-odd years presided over the nexus of North Carolina maritime communication with the world. If it were only a short time on an active and adventurous pair of decades for this remote spot, they were. When millions of cypress shingles and thousands of barrels of tar and pitch and salt herring went out into the world through here to be traded for finished goods. This was the port of North Carolina.
And this is interesting ballast stones that we found on the top of the island. And you can see some of the ruins in the background of this shot. But we've asked some geologists what this stone is. If we have any geologists out there in the audience who can make a guess of what this formation is, we'd love to know sometime. We haven't been successful finding out yet. So I guess we better speed on down the coast now to Cedar Island. This is near where I grew up in sea level. So fishing harbor on Cedar Island. And Cedar Island also has a large national wildlife refuge that is now adjacent to the Salters Creek natural area that the Land Trust just recently dedicated into the state wildlife system. So very proud of that.
That's Hog Island across Cedar Island Bay there in the background. And if you made a left or western turn in kind of the middle of the picture, you would be going farther into Cedar Island Bay and over toward the ferry slip out to Ocracoke.
Okay, so now let's go back to Harbor Island for a few minutes, shall we? Harbor Island is a place when I was a child, we would go with my parents for picnics. And this hunt club was almost intact at the time and had a beautiful stand of parsley that was growing wild all over the island from the Harbor Island Club's cook planting it years ago. The Harbor Island Club itself was made out of these beautiful tabby walls. If you're not familiar with tabby, it's a mixture of oyster shells and the calcium from the oyster shells and concrete. And so over time, as these walls have worn away, you can see more and more of the oyster interior of that. And here's just another view of the island. The entire island is made up of shell. And at the very end, we're going to show you what it looks like now, which is kind of sad, but beautiful place. You want to talk about Dennis?
Yeah, here we are on a Brady Lewis 26-foot skiff. Brady Lewis is one of the great boat builders of Harker's Island, Marshallburg area. And Dennis Chadwick is at the helm. Lada Piggott, Burney is there in the black cap. And Dennis was the captain of the Cedar Island, the ferry named Cedar Island that ran between Cedar Island and Ocracoke for many, many years. He knows all these Core Sound, Pamlico Sound waters cold. And he was taking us on a run around Brown's Island, which is another Coastal Land Trust holding of great interest. Brown's is a fairly substantial island between the mainland, Marshallburg, and Harker's Island. It's right on the north side of Harker's Island. And if you look at it from Google Earth, you'll see that there are a couple of Carolina bays there, one overlaying another. They're everywhere around the east. I want to read just a little passage here about walking that beach from kind of center to toward the left and to a place where Dennis Chadwick's grandmother's home had been. We drifted to the east along the beach, walked scuffing along between the scurf and the frill of foam at water's edge until at last we reached Brown's Island's retreating northeast point, where Dennis and Robin, his wife, reached into the shallows and withdrew a pair of tawny bricks from a trove of them there. These are the foundation bricks from my grandmother Callie's house, the Maley Nelson home place I told you about, Dennis said, before he and his wife threw the bricks back. And then the man who has 1,000 times floated the waters from Molly Bell's Point to the northeast point, where his kinfolk once throve and said simply, "I've collected a few, 8 maybe, might ought to come out and get a few more." These were foundation brick for his grandmother's home, which had been 75 yards back in the woods and now is in the shallows of the beach here.
Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but all right, I didn't like that slide for some reason. But here's another view of Brown's Island. A lot of the Harker's Islanders would run cattle over on Brown's Island, and these are some of the remains of the cattle pens that you see back there. So moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so now we're going to move on a little farther down the coast to Phillips Island on the Newport River, right off of Morehead City. This is an island that you see from the bridge as you go from Morehead over to Beaufort.
Yeah, many people see that chimney, which was connected with a boiler system to cook down menhaden, and you can't miss it from the bridge. It's really a beautiful structure.
Okay. Pivers Island, got its story?
Yeah, Pivers Island, most of y'all probably know that's where the Duke Marine Lab is, and other honored institutions, Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has an office there. And love the ropes. We have a lot of pictures of these ropes. They stayed still while she took the pictures. And Pivers Island is very near. It's right on Gallant's Channel at Beaufort, and it's very near the Carrot Island Rachel Carson National Estuarine Research Reserve. For good reason. Rachel Carson did a lot of work here, and through the Fish and Wildlife Office out here on Pivers Island, and she wrote very vividly, about 8 or 10 pages in The Edge of the Sea, about being out on Bird Shoal, the tidal flat there on the south side of the Carrot Island complex. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. I don't know that Rachel touched that rope, but she did work on Pivers Island.
And now finishing up, back to Harbor Island. In 1998, this is what Harbor Island looked like, just this low slip of land with the tiny remains of the Harbor Island Hunt Club there on the left. And we've heard from our friend Stan Riggs just recently that there is no hunt club and I don't think any vegetation left on Harbor Island. It will probably disappear in the next couple of years after the next few storms that we've got. It will be gone.
Yeah, I feel very lucky that Ann took me, and we've taken our children out there and friends out there to see this remnant of what was, and which was really a great motivator for us to do this book. I'm going to read the coda, the final passage of it, and we'll bring the curtain down there. In deepest yesteryear, the oncoming Atlantic drowned streams and created sounds, turned hillocks on the plain into hammocks in the marsh, leaving us hundreds of islands as it flooded a whole coastal plain below the one we know, a terrace now beneath Carolina's vast inland sea, one that no one shall view again for another 100,000 years. These inner islands are not rocks, nor metals hammered hard at Vulcan's stithy and made final for all time. They are simply mud and sands or shells or swamps, massed for moments mere. We may stand and stride upon them and take their measure, feel the brevity of their moments, how like our own, and perhaps feel too some sense of kinship between animate and inanimate, the kinship of all ephemera.
Thank you. Stop there. All right.
Ann and Bland, thank you so much for sharing that glimpse of the inner, not Outer Bank islands with us. I do appreciate that. And we appreciate your storytelling and the poetry and prose to help us bring us into that space. It's really beautiful, if ephemeral. I would invite anybody who would like to ask a question or make a comment, maybe share if you have spent time on any of these islands as Ann and Bland have. We'd love to hear from you, have some conversations. So feel free to unmute and do that at this time.
Brad, Bland, this is Jim.
Hey, Jim.
I think Bonnie and I can help you all with those ballast stones if you'll tell me where you think they came from to get to the coast of North Carolina.
Ooh. England for sure, but it could have been almost anywhere.
Probably the British Isles, either directly or through the Caribbean.
Yeah. Well, I'll work on it, and I'll let you all know if I find out. I've seen some in Indiana. and I don't know how they got to Indiana, but I know what to ask about, and I'll see if I can help identify the geologic history of all that.
That would be great.
We're just curious to know a little bit about it.
Yeah,
And it could be the cause for a second edition, Jim.
that would be good.
Well, also
Thank you.
it would give an indication of where ships were coming from, you know, whether it's
Yeah.
British Isles or somewhere farther afield.
Yeah, I enjoyed your program very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Camilla, have you visited any of the inner islands that Ann and Bland talked about?
Oh yeah, Browns Island I've been to. It was interesting to hear the story about, you know, the pilot that you pictured had actually, his family had a house there. Is that right? Was he one of his family was the landowner of Browns?
I think his grandmother predated there were 3 generations of Browns, I believe, starting in maybe around 1910 or the teens. They came from Hyde County, and I knew the youngest of those generations, J.M. Brown, an older man. Now, Dennis Chadwick's grandmother had a house back in the island, and those bricks are just right there in the surf today. So 75 yards of retreat.
Oh wow!
I mean, those are foundation bricks. The house was not built on the beach. It was built back in the woods.
Back in the woods.
Bland, do you know Radio Island?
Yes, I
Yes.
do. Mm-hmm.
That's near Pivers Island, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's just over. There's a little, very shallow cove between the two.
Okay. This is just an aside, but Bayard Wooten's brother, Sam Morgan, once owned Radio Island, and I don't recall the history of it. I should look it up in the Gazetteer, but I came across the fact that he once owned that island.
I did not know that.
Didn't know that either.
There was a radio station out there back in the.
I think
I don't
it
know.
may be military related, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure.
There was a commercial radio station that was the cool one when I was growing up. It was the good rock station. All by itself out there on Radio Island.
Sending those signals out to you.
Sending those signals.
Do you all know if the term climate migration that's coming into the conversation so rapidly now, did it exist with respect to the people moving off those islands, hurricanes or not? They just were moving to higher ground?
Well, that certainly affected. I mean, the famous story of Diamond City, where there were 500 people out there. And that's part of Shackelford Banks. That's a barrier island.
Yeah.
But some of these islands.
That's grave. They would have moved off of that.
Oh yeah, Bat's Grave up in the Albemarle off Yopim Creek and River on the north side of the Albemarle. That had a 40-acre, according to Dr. Powell, had a 40-acre farm on it in the 1720s or so, and it's nothing now but a shoal. But Lucan's Island had several hundred people living on it in the South River, which flows north into the Neuse. But that's been I think a lot of these places like Lucan's, there was fishing and forestry, and when either one of those played out sufficiently, the people just had to move to where they could make a living. So maybe climate migration, sure,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Might have been economic more than anything
economic
else.
imperative.
Sure.
Those people out on Shackelford Banks, Diamond City, they were driven off by a series of storms. The most magnificent one was the San Siriaco hurricane of August 1899. They gave up. They said, that's enough. I mean, their whole island was in the ocean, underwater. So.
They've floated houses.
The promised land at Moorhead is a part of that same story, right?
Right. They floated houses from the Cape over to Moorhead and created a new village there.
Yeah.
Yeah, those people were very adaptable. They knew how to move stuff around. The old store out on Ocracoke was Albert Steiren's store. James Berry Gaskell told me this. It was on Hog Island in the Cedar Island Bay, and all those people moved off back around 1920. I said, how do you move the whole store all that way out to Ocracoke? And James Berry said, oh, they cut it down to the walls, and they stacked the walls up on barges, and there you go. So that's an adaptation that was going on all over the Sound Country, really.
Sure.
It works. That store's been there for a long time now. They put it back together well.
Have y'all, this is Camilla, have y'all seen in your lifetimes any of these islands been impacted by sea level rise to a great extent? Just as you've been out there and about, and is there a difference in the various regions of the state as to some places being more vulnerable to others? Just, I know what scientists would say, but I'd be interested in what y'all have seen.
You've seen.
Well, I think the Harbor Island is probably the most dramatic example for us because over time, since the 60s, I guess, we've really seen that disappear. And, how much you attribute to sea level rise and how much storm damage over time is a question I can't answer, but I think it's a combination of both. I mean, it is, in our lifetime, that island has disappeared for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. And very near it, there are, if you look at the map of the north part of Core Sound, where Harbor Island is, you'll see there's several islands kind of almost in a line going across from Cedar Island out to the Core Banks. Chain Shot Island, there's a shell island there. Harbor Island, Wainwright Island was probably the biggest one, and we haven't been in that part of the waters for some years, but I understand that Wainwright Island has been cut in half, and that means it'll erode probably twice as fast with a stream running right through it. And there's a cut in Monkey Island up in Currituck Sound where the boathouse was. It's kind of a figure-8 shaped island, and that is eroding. I don't know how big it is now. It was 8 acres back in the 1980s, 1990s, but.
And Camilla, the other thing that has been pointed out to us just in the last couple of years are all of the smaller islands along the sounds where the pines have died off because of saltwater intrusion. They've just been killed off. Big stands of huge pines are now just dead. And where the island was green, now it's gray. And that would be an indication to me of a water level rising up and pushing that salt up into the higher in the water table on those islands. Yeah, that's a pretty stark one to me, because we are seeing that more and more all up and down the coast.
Yes, it's the double whammy, or the double barrel of saltwater intrusion and overwash, in the brackish areas. And Stan Riggs has documented it very, very well in the drowning of the North Carolina coast. And as Ann says, we're seeing it. Penny Hooper pointed out a stand of 50 trees that was now down to maybe 5 or 10 pine trees on an edge near Smyrna, Middens Creek. And we were noticing when we were driving down the road from Smyrna to Marshallburg earlier this summer, the pines over toward another area of Middens Creek, how many of them are just now ghosts, kind of a ghost forest over there to the left as you head to Marshallburg. Next time you're down that way, take a look. It's pretty stunning. It's happening very quickly.
And we're seeing some other small things, like Davis Island in Carteret County it's another small island that has a big house on it. And we noticed this year that the front yard of the house that faces the sound has really eroded back. significantly, almost to the house. And the causeway that once connected the island to the mainland is now completely gone. It's washed out. It's truly an island again.
Yes, very much so. So, I mean, these are just observations, you know, that lots of people are making in various parts of the coast. I notice a section of timberland that I know pretty well in South Pasquotank County has gotten spongier and spongier. I've known this spot since I was about 8 years old, and it's gotten spongier and spongier. And there's no mystery here. It's just a natural process.
How does one get into this conversation?
You're in it.
You're in it, Dan.
You're in
Am I
it.
in it?
Yes, we got you.
Bland,
Yes, ma'am.
the tiny little patch of green grass, not grass, but growth in front of Tony's sanitary fish market, the little island sitting there you go through between. My dad used to own that, and he bought it to hunt on. I guess his uncle John Borden, who was Arnold Borden's father, had a home down in the Promised Land, and Arnold worked for the library, and he was the sculptor that did the head sculpture that's in the reading room. I don't, y'all wouldn't know Arnold. He died back in the 60s probably, but he was my father's first cousin. But the tiny island that Daddy used to like to just perch himself out there to duck hunt, I guess. He was an avid hunter and quite a pot shot, I understand. I witnessed my brother Ed would flip a quarter up in the air, and Daddy could shoot the quarter shoot a hole in it or dent in it or something. But he'd flip it up in the air. But anyway, that little, I don't know that it has a name unless it's just a bird island. But I don't know.
Are you talking about right across from the restaurants there along?
Yeah, that's just a little patch of
That's Sugarloaf Island.
Sugarloaf.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm glad it has a name. I don't know that it had that name when Daddy owned it back when he was probably a young man, because he didn't get married until his late 30s. But he was down there hunting frequently. We've got pictures of him and other relatives and family and friends with ducks hanging on big frames where they'd go duck hunting. Herman Wheel from Goldsboro and Tom Norwood and Charles Norwood's uncle. Lots of other people that you would know from eastern North Carolina would hunt frequently. And of course, Daddy didn't belong to Camp Brown, but Ed did. Ed and his children. But you've never gotten out to see the cypresses. But
I'm going to interview you, Dana, about the shooting the quarter out of the air and put it in the second edition just as soon as I get the
no, interview Ed. Ed's the one that did it.
I'll interview all of you.
Wonderful. We've got a lot of knowledge about the eastern North Carolina coast on this call today. It's really cool to hear everyone's stories. Thank you.
Well, I certainly did enjoy it. This is my first Zoom. I had somebody come and put me on Zoom on my phone this morning about 30 minutes before y'all came on board. And I was frantically, here I am sitting in my kitchen watching and enjoying it so much. It's great to see you.
That's great. I'm so glad you got on this morning.
Well, I didn't get Bob Anthony's message until last night, and so I was wondering how I was going to get Zoom hooked up between now and when it started. But thank you for.
We gotcha. That's so cool. And just so you and everyone knows, we do have the Little Lunch Lectures every Friday planned. Most of all October is planned, and one in November even as well. So it's kind of a rolling thing, and we're just going to keep on going. Next Friday, October 2nd, Heather Hodges will be with us, and she is the executive director of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. So if you would like to learn more about that group and the history, the very strong history that group has on the Eastern Coast, please do join us noon as always. And on October the 9th, Ted Wilgis is the senior coastal specialist with the Coastal Fed, and he is going to present about oyster farming and how that is becoming a green economic engine for our coastal area. Online on our website, you can see all of the upcoming Little Lunch lectures. And the other thing you'll see is a very special thing that's happening tomorrow. The Coastal Land Trust will have our annual celebration on Zoom from 5 till about 6:15, and we will have a special message from Susie Hamilton and the Secretary of the Cultural and Natural Resources from the state of North Carolina, as well as live music from Mason Borough Sound. We'll have our membership meeting. We'll hear about the lands that the Coastal Land Trust saved this year, hear what's coming next. We'd love to have everybody. It is free to attend. So just if you go over to the link that Van's going to put in the chat right now, and you can RSVP if you haven't already, and that will send you the Zoom link that you can use to join us tomorrow. And I hope that you all will take the opportunity to do that, because we'd love to see you right back here on Zoom tomorrow. Okay, so that's about all that we have for today. Ann and Bland, thank you again. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week. No, tomorrow. See you tomorrow, then next week.
Thanks, Bland and Ann.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun. Good to see everybody.
Thank you very much. Good to see all of you.
Bye.